Ever think about what it was like to live back when, like, your neighbor, your friend, even your family could just turn on you with a single word? And it's a scary word, witchcraft.
Yeah, it's hard to even fathom the kind of atmosphere that created where an accusation alone could pretty much derail someone's entire life.
Yeah, and now just imagine you're like one of those brilliant scientific minds of your time, right? Like on the verge of these major astronomical discoveries, but then boom, this whole world of yours is just completely overshadowed by those witch trials. And the worst part, the person at the center of it all is your own mother.
That's quite a predicament.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're talking about Johannes Kepler and the incredible fight he put up to save his mom, Katharina Kepler, from this system that just thrived on fear and suspicion. It's really a story that continues to resonate with us today.
for sure. So let's set the stage here. We're talking 17th century Germany,
Yeah.
specifically southern Germany in the 1600s when those witch trials were at their peak.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea how intense things were, southern Germany alone accounted for something like 25% of all the witch executions in Europe.
It's a chilling statistic, and it really underscores that specific fervor, that intensity surrounding witchcraft accusations in that region.
Right, and to really get a grasp on this,
Yeah.
we have to remember that Germany wasn't a unified country back then. It was more like a patchwork of these individual states. Some of them were ruled by powerful bishops.
And those bishops viewed witchcraft as like a direct attack on their authority and the church's teachings.
So it was a time of huge social and political turmoil, ripe for fear and suspicion to really take root.
Oh, absolutely. And then you have to factor in the Little Ice Age, too. It was a
Mhm.
period where the climate got unusually cold, and it brought all these hardships with it, famine and all that. People were desperate to survive. And when you're that desperate, it's easy to start pointing fingers to find someone to blame.
Exactly. Now enter Katharina Kepler. She was this seemingly ordinary woman who lived in this town called Leonberg. She was known in her community for being really skilled with herbs.
Yeah, in a time when pharmacies were few and far between, she was like a lifeline for her neighbors. She used her knowledge of plants and remedies to bring comfort and healing to people.
And just to be clear, Leonberg wasn't some isolated backwater village. It actually had a pretty strong communal economy with rules in place to make sure resources were shared and wealth wasn't hoarded. So it was a community that actually strived for fairness. But even in a place like that, fear and suspicion could easily creep in.
And that's precisely what happened in 1615 when Katharina was hit with an accusation of witchcraft by a woman named Ursula Reinhold. And from what we can gather from the sources, Ursula was a woman who had struggled with chronic illness for a long time. And she seems to have been consumed by anger and resentment.
And what's really interesting is that these two women, Ursula and Katharina, they were actually friends at one point. But something shifted between them, maybe a perceived slight or a disagreement, and that friendship soured into this bitter animosity.
Ursula became completely convinced that Katharina was the root of all her problems, that she had somehow used witchcraft to poison her.
And in a community that was already on edge, those accusations just spread like wildfire whispers, turned into formal charges fueled by fear and the prevailing belief in witchcraft. So suddenly Katharina's facing this mountain of accusations,
Yeah.
everything from poisoning to like walking through walls and making deals with demons, all the classic witch tropes.
And this is where we see the legal system of the time kicking in.
Oh.
And it might surprise you to learn that it was actually more complex than you'd think. The Duke of Württemberg, who was the ruler of that region, actually had a system in place to investigate these accusations.
So they had governors gathering evidence, legal professionals reviewing cases, and if they thought torture was necessary to get a confession, they even consulted university law experts for their opinions.
So there was a process, a framework for handling these trials. But of course, it was a framework still deeply embedded in a world where superstition and fear were rampant.
Right. And this is where Katharina's son, Johannes Kepler, enters the picture. As we know, Kepler was a brilliant astronomer. He made groundbreaking discoveries about the way planets move. He was a man of science, a man of reason, and all of a sudden he's thrust into this world that just completely defies logic.
Just imagine being in his shoes. You're a renowned scientist, you're on the cusp of revolutionizing humanity's understanding of the universe, and then bam, you're faced with the very real possibility that your own mother could be condemned as a witch.
And it wasn't just his mother's life that was on the line. His own reputation, his entire career were at stake. People would start whispering, oh, that's Kepler, the great scientist whose mom is a witch.
So how does a mind, like Kepler's a mind trained in observation and analysis, approach this problem?
Well, he decides to fight fire with fire. He uses his scientific training, his methodology, to break down the accusations against his mother.
So he's meticulously going through witness testimonies, searching for inconsistencies, contradictions, anything that could cast doubt on those claims against Katharina. It's like he's a detective using his scientific rigor to scrutinize every detail, every piece of evidence, trying to find the weak spots in the story being built against his mother.
But Kepler takes it a step further. He takes a much bolder approach that really reveals his understanding of human nature and the power dynamics at play in these trials. He basically argues that this whole witch hunt is fundamentally a persecution of vulnerable older women.
And that is a remarkably progressive stance for that time. He cuts right through the superstition, the fear-mongering, and pinpoints this pattern of systemic discrimination. He's not just defending his mom, he's challenging the very foundation upon which these accusations rest.
Now, you might be thinking, was Kepler some kind of 17th century feminist fighting for women's rights?
Mhm.
But it's more complicated than that. While he fought tooth and nail for his mother, some of his writings do reflect those misogynistic views that were sadly common in his era.
It's a reminder that historical figures are complicated. They are products of their time, and we need to acknowledge both their achievements and their limitations. We can admire Kepler's scientific genius and his courage in defending Katharina, while also recognizing that his worldview was still influenced by the prejudices of his time.
And that complexity is really evident in the strategy he uses to defend Katharina. He paints this picture of her as a virtuous woman, a skilled herbalist, a pillar of her community. And he contrasts that image with Ursula, who he portrays as a failed woman, driven by envy and bitterness.
So he's using those prevailing societal norms about women to bolster his mother's image and discredit her accuser. It's a tactic that might make us uncomfortable today, but it underscores the tough choices Kepler had to make as he navigated this treacherous legal landscape.
And we can't forget the toll this whole ordeal took on the entire Kepler family. Imagine the emotional strain, the fear, the social stigma Katharina had to endure, 14 grueling months in prison, chained and mistreated, while Johannes fought tirelessly for her freedom.
And it forced Johann to confront his mother's world in a way he never had before. He had to dig into the details of her life, her relationships, her past. He had to understand not just the scientific principles that govern the cosmos, but also the complex workings of the human heart, the motivations that could drive someone to accuse another person of such a horrific crime.
It was a deeply personal and transformative experience for him.
Absolutely.
Picking up where we left off, we were talking about Katharina facing those just awful conditions in prison. And Johannes was working tirelessly to build her defense, using his scientific knowledge and legal strategy.
It's really something to think about the pressure on Johannes during this time. He was working on his astronomical masterpiece, Harmony of the World. At the same time, he was battling to save his mother from a legal system that was just deeply flawed.
It's almost impossible to imagine juggling those two worlds, the precision of celestial mechanics on one hand and the just murky world of accusations and superstition on the other.
And the pressure just kept mounting. As the trial dragged on and Katharina's imprisonment stretched to 14 months, cracks started to show within the Kepler family itself.
Yeah, the sources we've looked at reveal a pretty heartbreaking turn of events. Katharina's other son, Christoph, just overwhelmed by the social stigma and fear, withdrew his support for his own mother. He wanted to distance himself from the whole scandal to protect his own reputation.
And unfortunately, it wasn't just Christoph, Katharina's daughter, and even her pastor husband. Unable to cope with the pressure and the isolation, they all withdrew their support too.
Wow, so Johannes was essentially alone in this fight for his mother. His own family abandoned her because they were afraid the taint of witchcraft would ruin their lives.
It really highlights how powerful fear and social pressure were back then. Even family bonds could be shattered by a simple accusation of witchcraft.
And yet, Johannes kept going. He could have easily given up, focused on his scientific work, and just left his mother to fate. But he didn't. Driven by a sense of duty and love for his mother, he just kept fighting for her freedom.
It's incredible. He traveled to that remote prison where Katharina was being held, put up with the scorn of the guards who believed she was guilty, and spent countless hours with her talking, listening, trying to understand her world, her relationships, all to build the strongest defense he could.
This is where we see the real genius of Johannes Kepler. He combined his analytical mind, honed by years of scientific training, with a deep empathy for his mother. He looked at the accusations with a scientist's eye, but he also saw the very real human cost of this ordeal, the pain inflicted on his mother and his family.
And in the end, his efforts paid off. After years of legal battles, Johannes managed to get Katharina released from prison. It was a huge victory for reason and evidence over superstition and fear.
It must have been a moment of incredible relief for Johannes and Katharina and anyone who believed that truth could prevail. It wasn't just a victory for one family, but for a more rational and just approach to accusations like these.
But as we touched on earlier, the story doesn't have a completely happy ending. Katharina, after enduring those horrifying conditions for 14 months, left prison a changed woman.
Yeah, she was physically and emotionally exhausted bearing the scars of that ordeal. And tragically, just 6 months after her release, Katharina died.
It's a sad reminder that even when justice is served, the damage done by these trials could be profound and lasting.
Absolutely. And the impact of this experience stayed with Johannes Kepler throughout his life and work.
Definitely. After Katharina's death, Johannes went through a period of deep introspection. He wrestled with guilt and grappled with these profound questions about the world and his place in it.
It's like he was trying to make sense of something senseless. To understand how a system built on fear and superstition could have almost destroyed his mother and his family.
And this is where things get even more interesting. Remember that science fiction story Johannes wrote as a student? The Dream.
Yeah, the one where he imagines what Earth would look like from the moon.
Exactly. But it also includes this mother figure who can access knowledge through a demon.
Interesting. So how does this fictional story connect to Katharina's trial?
Well, after the trial, Johann became fixated on the dream. He started to wonder if this story, with its themes of magic and demonic knowledge, had somehow made its way back to Leonberg, and maybe even fueled the accusations against his mother.
That's a pretty unsettling thought. So what did he do about it?
He did something remarkable. He decided to publish the dream. But he added all these footnotes explaining where his ideas came from, carefully distancing himself from any autobiographical interpretations.
So he was trying to prevent any misunderstandings to protect his mother's memory and maybe even his own reputation.
Exactly, but it was more than that. By publishing the dream with those footnotes, Johann was exploring the boundaries between science, magic, and belief.
He was grappling with a complex relationship between imagination and storytelling and the very real consequences those stories can have in a world ruled by superstition.
And through this process, Johann started asking some really important questions about knowledge itself. Where does knowledge come from? Is it always rational, always based on evidence? Or can it come from unexpected places like dreams, intuition, or even demons?
Those are questions that are still relevant today as we try to navigate a world bombarded with information, where figuring out what's true and what's not can feel overwhelming.
And Johannes, through his personal struggles and his intellectual journey, gives us a valuable perspective. He reminds us that even the most brilliant scientific minds can be affected by superstition, by the power of belief, by the fears of their time.
But Johannes and Katharina's story isn't just about the clash between science and superstition. It's also a deeply personal story about family loyalty and the power of love in the face of adversity.
And that leads us to one of the mysteries of the story. What happened to Katharina in those last months after she was released from prison? People usually assume she went to live with her daughter and her husband, but there's not much evidence to support that.
It doesn't seem very likely, given how strained their relationship became during the trial. Wouldn't it make more sense for Johannes, feeling both responsible for and protective of his mother, to take her in to care for her in her final days?
It's a compelling theory, and there is some circumstantial evidence. Johannes stopped his usual correspondence and scholarly activities for 6 months after Katharina was released. Maybe he needed that time to care for his sick mother, to shield her from prying eyes and judgment.
It's a touch of a thought. This brilliant scientist who had unlocked the secrets of the universe, spending his last months with his mother, providing simple acts of love and care.
It's a reminder that even in the face of incredible achievements, the bonds of family and human connection are what truly matter.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into this incredible story. As we wrap things up, it's amazing to think about how this whole clash between scientific thought and deeply rooted superstition impacted not just Kepler's life personally, but also his intellectual legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like this dark chapter, this fight for his mother's life and her reputation. It kind of seeped into his work and shaped his whole perspective on knowledge, belief, even the nature of reality itself.
We've talked a lot about Kepler's groundbreaking work in astronomy, but it's really important to remember the historical context here. I mean, the 30 Years' War was raging across Europe. It was this brutal conflict driven by all these religious and political divisions.
Imagine the turmoil during that time. Kepler, a man devoted to science and reason, he's witnessing firsthand the sheer destructive power of fanaticism and blind faith.
And he wasn't immune to it either. We talked about how he worried that his own science fiction story, The Dream, with its themes of demonic knowledge, might somehow contributed to those accusations against his mother.
It really shows how blurred the lines were between magic, science, and religion during this time. Even a mind as brilliant as Kepler's couldn't fully escape the influence of those intertwined forces.
But the fascinating thing is that he didn't shy away from those complexities. He used his writing, his scientific mind, to tackle them head on. In The Dream, he explores this idea of a demon as a potential source of knowledge, challenging those conventional ideas about where understanding comes from.
It's like he's asking, where does knowledge actually come from? Is it always purely rational, always based on evidence? Or can it come from these unexpected places like dreams, intuition, even from something supernatural?
And those are questions that still resonate with us today. As we try to navigate this world where we're constantly bombarded with information, trying to figure out what's true and what's false can feel almost impossible.
Exactly. Kepler's story reminds us that searching for knowledge isn't this straightforward path. It's a journey full of twists and turns where personal experiences, societal pressures, even our own deeply held beliefs can shape how we see the world.
And when you think about Kepler's other work, his attempts to decipher this harmony of the cosmos, to unlock those mathematical laws that govern the movement of planets, after witnessing the chaos and the injustice of those witch trials, how could he not consider those darker forces that also exist in the human heart?
It's a powerful reminder that even the most brilliant scientific minds aren't separate from their personal experiences. Kepler's journey as a scientist was deeply intertwined with his emotional journey, with that fight to save his mother from a system that was so unreasonable.
It challenges us to think about the human side of scientific discovery, to remember that the people behind those groundbreaking ideas were also complex individuals with families, with fears, with beliefs that inevitably shaped their work.
And it encourages us to be more critical, more discerning with the information we take in, to question our assumptions, to examine the sources of our own beliefs, and to recognize that the pursuit of knowledge requires not just intellectual rigor, but also a deep understanding of what it means to be human.
So what can we take away from all of this?
Yeah.
I think the story of Johannes and Katharina Kepler serves as a powerful reminder that even in a time of incredible scientific progress, superstition, fear, and prejudice can still have a stronghold.
It highlights how important critical thinking is, questioning authority, standing up for truth and justice even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous.
It reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge isn't just about gathering facts and figures. It's about understanding the complexity of human experience, the forces that shape our beliefs and our actions.
And maybe most importantly, it underscores the enduring power of family, those bonds of love and loyalty that can carry us through even the darkest times.
The story of Johannes and Katharina Kepler is one that continues to resonate with us centuries later. It's a testament to the power of reason, the fragility of truth, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into this truly captivating tale. And remember, there's always more to explore, more hidden corners of history and knowledge just waiting to be discovered.